the Atlantropa Articles. This was a book I stumbled on quite by accident. I was on YouTube, I was searching for videos that would tell me about the actual historical Atlantropa project. For those of you who don't know, that was a wild, crazy, loony idea that was thrown around in the around the turn of the 20th century, mostly in Europe. I think most of its support was in Germany, but it was this kooky idea to dam up the Mediterranean Sea, along with a few other strategic dams around the Mediterranean. And the idea was that the series of dams would create an enormous amount of hydroelectrical power that would power all of Europe. And secondarily, by draining the Mediterranean, I think the original plan was to drain the Mediterranean by about 2/3. And by draining it, you would gain, huge swaths of, new land for people to live on and farms and all that. Actually, I think it went even a little further. You drain the Mediterranean some, but you also divert water to create two huge artificial seas in the Sahara Desert, and that would start the greening process of the Sahara. And the idea was you were going to create this huge new, actual useful temperate region in the Mediterranean and Sahara. But reality is that's not how it would have worked out. Anyway, it was a kooky idea that would have cost too much money and taken too many supplies, and there were too many unknowns. Plus, there were all these worries, too, about, well, what if some crazy person came along and tried to blow up the dam, too? So, of course, nothing ever happened with that plan. However, the book I have here is an alternate history novel, and it comes from the premise that, let's say Hitler still came to power in Germany, the Nazis came to power, but what if instead of a Second World War, that never happened? What if instead they actually followed through on that project, the Atlantropa project? How would the world have turned out instead? And this book talks about how that world would look, or at least a small piece of it, how it would look 2,000 years in the future. So the book itself sets up a world where, the Mediterranean is, of course, dammed up. It provides hydropower to Europe, which is entirely 100% dependent upon it. The Mediterranean Sea has been completely drained. But of course, instead of producing, useful, nice, temperate land, the drained Mediterranean basin now is the world's hottest desert, where the soil is simply choked with, eons worth of sea salt. So in this world, what's happened, the United Europe, which is essentially Germania, I think they call it, Germania has set up a series of fortified towns or fortified cities all across their new southern border, which is now that Mediterranean basin they call the Kiln. So they have these eagles' nests, that's what they call them, set up all across this frontier. And what the purpose of the eagle's nest is to essentially police that border. In the book, they say that they're colonists and they're, settlers and they're, building that new frontier. Reality, though, it's impossible to live out in the desert. What these are just fortified towns. They're not expanding. They're not growing. They're not trying to convert the salted earth into anything productive. They're just fortified towns. And they're just fighting off what they call the scavengers, which is essentially North Africans. So the book itself is about, it gets even a little more detailed to explain. So these eagles' nests depend on a network of supply ships, they're not ships in the way that we know them today. They're They're essentially large, ship-sized tanks that tread out on the new sandy Mediterranean basin, and they come south from Europe, and they resupply the Eagle's Nest periodically. So the book's main character is a captain of one of these ships, and what happens is at the start, his brother finishes his studies as an SS Knight for the Eternal Reich, as they call it, this new Germania here, the Europe-wide Germania. Each ship is supposed to have it's a controlled economy, so each ship is technically owned by the government, and the captain, as much as he's the captain, he doesn't own the ship. He's just managing it for the Reich. And his brother, as a new SS Knight, is going to go serve on a ship in the Kiln, the Mediterranean basin, and act. Essentially, he controls a space weapon that's used to defend these ships from scavenger pirates. That's the main problem here in the Kiln. They're fighting off the North Africans, who attack the Eagle's Nest, and they attack the supply ships. Yeah. I hope I'm not leaving something out as I'm kind of going over this in my mind. I don't want to. That's the premise of the whole story. I don't want to tell you the full conflict because I don't want to spill all the beans on this. I will tell you the book is entertaining. It's entertaining, but with flaws. I'm going to give this like a B. Yeah, let me get into some of the flaws. So it takes place 2,000 years in the future, as I said. It doesn't feel like it. They describe the technology of the future, what they're using, and none of it sounds really futuristic. I mean, maybe I could believe this is the world 100 years from now, 200 maybe, but not 2,000. They're still using tracked vehicles. As far as I know, they're not using any kind of like laser weapons like we would expect. They're still firing off guns with bullets, rifles with bullets. Shipping things by air is still too expensive. That's why they have this whole network of tracked ships, riding along the desert there. They have space weapons, they have space colonies, yet at the same time, the pirates are able to evade their advanced 2,000 years in the future satellites by putting on, essentially white cloth canopies over their pirate ships. So it can't be that advanced. And that's kind of the thing that kind of takes me out of the premise of the novel. I like the idea he's trying to imagine the far future, but I don't know. I guess this is what is the problem with imagining the far future. It could be 2,000 years in the future. It could really just be anything. It could be super advanced, or civilization could collapse. You really just don't know. So it could be that this is realistic, but he didn't paint a picture of why it's realistic. I could make up excuses, like perhaps as much as, the Reich's propaganda says they're super advanced, maybe they're really not. Maybe, they've been stagnating technologically for 2,000 years, and they're just telling the people out there that we're super advanced, and yes, you should be really proud of all of our achievements, but nothing actually really changes technically. Things just stay the same year in, year out. That could be. Perhaps, 2,000 years of history, maybe there was some kind of dark age that they're coming back from too. That could also be it. But again, they don't, make a mention of it. I, as the reader, am filling in these ideas in my head to make sense of the story. And that's really where the author's falling down. I shouldn't be making sense of his story. He should be making sense of his story and telling me about it. The other big flaw isn't just the technology. The other big flaw I found in this is with the central plot. And what happens, the conflict is driven by when they capture a scavenger prisoner. Normally what happens is the crew simply butchers whatever prisoners they capture. They don't normally take any. But what happens on this voyage is, now that they have, the captain has his brother there, the SS Knight, And he's telling him that, the SS would love to capture one of these scavengers to interrogate them. We haven't had any contact with them in centuries. We don't know how they think. We don't know what they speak. We don't know anything about what their motivations are. If we could take one back to Germany, then we can actually interrogate one and learn something that would probably help us in the future and better defend the Eagle's Nests against these people. But of course, the crew is full of its bloodlust, and the captain has, I'd say, complicated bloodlust. It's not simply like I enjoy butchering people, although he does, but it's for more complicated reasons. But the captain relents, lets him keep a prisoner lets him keep one of the scavengers as prisoners, and of course the crew then starts to distrust him because they start to whisper about, like, oh, I bet he's plotting with him, I bet he's influenced him. But what perplexes me is they arrive at an eagle's nest to supply it. Fine, you're at the eagle's nest. I'm sure. The thing is, it's a fortified town. It has to have a military garrison. Definitely, it should have a military garrison. If not, its own police force or a sheriff or a constable or something. They're going to have holding cells. How about this SS knight say, hey, you know what? I have this prisoner. It's causing problems with this crew. I'm going to get him off the ship because now they're starting to whisper and plot. Take the prisoner off, lock him up with the garrison, radio back to the Reich that, hey, guess what, SS? I have one of those prisoners you've wanted to capture for, like, decades now. Send a ship. Send a plane down here. This is kind of a high priority. The SS would be a big organization. It would have resources. And I'm sure this major fortified town has a radio. They're not living in isolation. Call back. Call for help. Let them know. Instead, no, nothing. The book is silent, actually. It doesn't even give a plausible reason. It doesn't give a bad reason. It says nothing. They get to the town. There's a brief bit of narration about the conflict between the captain and his brother. And essentially what happens is they give them... his brother gives him the silent treatment for the whole time they're in the town. And I see no attempt is ever made to do anything to change that situation. The prisoner's left on the ship, the brother gets back on the ship, and the fight simply resumes when they're traveling to the next fortified town to make another delivery. It's just dumb. The logic isn't there. So that bothered me as well. Even with those two flaws, I still think it's a good book because I mostly enjoyed it. It was a page turner. It wasn't difficult it wasn't a slog. I didn't have a hard time, going through it. And that said, I got to the end with, the book left me with kind of a bad taste in my mouth at the end because it's one of those books where, some books, the idea is that you're reading about kind of a shift in things. You're reading about some kind of struggle that's going to change wherever the status quo is. But this isn't one of those books. It's a book where kind of the events of the story kind of resolve themselves in a way that leads you back to the status quo. And those kind of annoy me a little, those kinds of stories, because, if I'm going to spend the time reading, if you have a story to tell me, I feel like it should have a point. And the point would be telling me this conflict led to this change in the broadest sense. But instead, I'm reading this book and it's this conflict led to absolutely no change whatsoever, and the events of it were inconsequential. I find that frustrating. I mean, maybe that's the point of the story, leave the reader feeling something, in this case frustrated, but I didn't like that. But, at the same time, as negative as I'm being on that, the book has positives. Very entertaining, and, especially for a first-time author. Cody Franklin here is not a regular author. This is his first book, and he's not even, he normally writes not historical. He normally writes alternate history fiction. I believe he runs. I didn't do too much research into this. I think he runs like a Reddit thing. I don't go on Reddit, so I don't remember what those topic sections are called. But you know, a Reddit group or whatever where they talk about and they throw around alternate history ideas. And I think, you know, this book grew out of one of his discussions there, I think. It's definitely an achievement for someone who doesn't normally do this sort of thing. Definitely entertaining. I definitely think the book needs to be fleshed out more. I would like to see, you know, this is something where I'd like to see him come back with like a second edition 5 years from now, you know, and add some meat to the story, add some context to the universe. Yeah, I mean, this is like the beginning, the bones of a really good story, but it's not 100% fully done. So, I don't know. I'd still recommend it if you're the type of person who likes, you know, if you like historical, not historical, I keep saying that. If you like alternate history stuff, it's definitely something that'll interest you. But even if you're not, I still think it's interesting just as a work of fiction. You know, it still does a good job of showing some conflict between humans, conflict between brothers, in an odd, unusual setting, you know, but again, the no matter what I guess the idea being whether, you know, the past, the present, and the future, those kinds of brotherly conflicts and bonds still remain. And, you know, if you like reading that kind of conflict there, I think you'd still find something enjoyable from this. So that's why I kind of still give it a recommend, despite the flaws, despite what I said earlier. But, yeah. And again, here at the end, too, I'm going to apologize for taking so long to record this. I spent a long time trying to get through Proust. That was supposed to be what the topic was on this video, and I couldn't do it. I got 200 pages into that book. What was it called? What was it? Like Memories of Cambrai or something? I can't remember the title. But yeah, I got about 200 pages in. It's too boring. Too dry, too strange, too different. I could not get through it. And plus my brother asked me for it back since he wants to read the rest of that series and he wants to refer to a few things in this, so I'm just giving it back to him. And that's why I kind of jumped on this book. It was a kind of a quick read, quick and easy. You know, I finished this in 3 days. It's not a long book, 188 pages, and you know, those were with generous margins too. Yeah. So all in all, definitely a recommend. And I hopefully we'll be back with another video a lot sooner than I think the 2 or 3 months it took to do this one. Sorry about that.